Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy. I'm a writer, and this is an educational YouTube series meant to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversations with other writers. Bil Lepp is an award-winning storyteller, author, and recording artist. He is the host of History Channel's Man vs. History series, the occasional host of NPR's internationally syndicated Mountain Stage, and a contributing columnist to the West Virginia Gazette-Mail. Bill's humorous, family-friendly tales and stories have earned the appreciation of listeners of all ages and from all walks of life. Though a 5-time champion of the West Virginia Liars contest, Lepp's stories often contain morsels of truth which present universal themes in clever and witty ways. Audiences all across the country, from grade schools to corporate executives to the Comedy Central's Hudson Stage, have been delighted by Bill's mirthful tales and insights into everyday life. Bill's books and audio collections have won awards including the Penn Stephen Kroll Award for Children's Book Writing, Parents' Choice Gold Awards, and awards from the National Parenting Publications Association and the Public Library Association. He is also the recipient of the Vandalia Award, West Virginia's highest folk honor. And this is my conversation with Bill.
How's that?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Before we get started, I just want to say I think that Wally Fortuna Finstermacher is the best character ever created.
Thank you very much. I like Wally a lot.
So what are you working on now, and what motivated the project or projects?
Well, I just published back on June 29th my most recent book, which is called That Ain't the Whole Plan. And it's a collection of 31 Skeeter and Bill stories that date back to about 1997 through pretty much this year. And so it just came out, and so that's not something I'm working on, obviously, because I'm done with it, but I feel good about it. And so I haven't done a lot since then. But I'm just about to start, I'm leaving tomorrow, and we'll be on tour all across the country for basically the next 8 or 9 weeks. So I've written a whole bunch of new material this year, like I always do. And so I'm just really diving into that and getting it ready to take it out on the storytelling circuit for the first time.
What have you learned about yourself through writing and storytelling?
I guess I learned I'm funny. I really, really enjoy, I think one of the benefits of being a storyteller is that unlike a lot of different kinds of artists, like painters or photographers, I get to see my audience react to my art. And you can do that as an author, but it's kind of weird to stand over somebody reading your book, and be like, oh, why'd you laugh at that part? So I write all of my own stories. I mean, physically write them, but then I get to take them out on stage and I get to say them out loud and I get to watch people react to them. And I guess I've learned that I have a pretty big ego because I really enjoy watching people respond positively to my work. But I guess I've also learned that, I've been doing this now since about 1990, telling stories on stage, writing stories and telling stories. When I started, most of my stuff was just like straight funny. Like I wasn't trying to do anything but make people laugh. But I've figured out now that since I've been doing this for a long time and I've been in front of some audiences. I'm going to this festival out in Utah this week. And I started going there in 2001, I think was my first time. So for 22 years, I've been in front of this audience. And so they trust me and other audiences. So I can say a little bit more meaningful stuff in my stories. Probably for the last 5 years, I've been doing stuff that's a little bit deeper, just like just kind of buried inside of a larger, just funny framework. I found that I enjoy saying some things that sometimes I think are important to say and that people might not listen to if it wasn't coming from me.
What's the role or responsibility of storytelling for you? What keeps you generating material? Why write and tell these stories?
I love doing it. I'm not really good at anything else. And I always wanted to be a writer. Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to write. And what I found out was, I was born in 1970. So when I was a teenager or in my 20s, obviously we didn't have the internet. So it was a lot more difficult to get people to read anything that you'd written. My children put things, there's all these online forums now where you can put things that you've written, and your peers will comment on them. And so people are out there seeing it. But I didn't really have that opportunity. And so uh, when I got my start storytelling and kind of writing in the West Virginia Liars Contest, which is held every year as part of the Vandalia Gathering. And it's a tall tale telling contest basically designed to promote and perpetuate oral history and storytelling in Appalachia. So my brother started doing it in about 1986, and I watched him do it for 3 or 4 years. And I thought, you know what, I could probably do that. He was winning. I thought I can do that. And so I remember very clearly being in my dorm at West Virginia Wesleyan. It was a February afternoon, and I thought I should enter the Liars Contest, which is in May. And so I thought I need a story for the Liars Contest, and I thought I could walk all the way to the library, which is like half a city block. And I can go through the card catalog and find a bunch of books of stories and then read all of those stories and then pick one and then learn it. And that seemed like a lot of work. And then I remembered I wanted to be a writer, and I was sitting at my desk. So I just got out a legal notepad, and I wrote my first story that I ever wrote to tell out loud. And I went to the Liars Contest and I told it, and I got second place, which I was totally satisfied with. And I found out that if you write a story and learn to say it out loud, people have to listen to you, unless they can't outrun you. And so I write my stories, I learn my stories, I tell my stories, and I wear running shoes. So that's where I got my start in storytelling, was doing the Liars Contest. And then I didn't know that there was any other storytelling in the whole wide world. I just did it around West Virginia in the Liars Contest and just around for about 8 years. And then there was a really small storytelling festival in Jackson's Mill that was mostly just West Virginia storytellers. But they had invited a national storyteller, a guy named Ed Stuyvesant out of Philadelphia, who's just an absolute genius. And I was blown away. He was the first full-time professional storyteller I ever met. And I was just astounded by what he was doing on stage. And more importantly, he liked what I was doing. So he gave my name to the National Storytelling Festival. And they invited me for a 15-minute spot in 2000. And then things just kind of took off after that.
When you're struggling to get parts of a story out or map connections between ideas, what strategies do you use to help get you through those trouble spots in that first draft stage of the writing process?
I'm in a jam a lot, it seems. And COVID, like a lot of artists, I couldn't be creative during COVID for whatever reason. So I've had a lot of practice at this. And I get a lot of ideas for stories that seem like a good idea to begin with, and then they just don't go anywhere. For example, the story of Wallace Fortuna Fenstermacher. Wally was a character that I created in a much earlier story. He had kind of a minor role. I really liked him, but he was just waiting tables in my head, waiting for another role to come along. And I had this idea. I wanted to tell a story about the rope. When I was in elementary school, there was always a rope hanging from the ceiling of the gym, and we had to climb all the way up to the top of the rope and touch the ceiling. So I wanted to write a story about the rope, and I thought Wally would be a good person to climb the rope. And what I wanted Wally to do in the story was climb to the rope climb to the ceiling and then climb up into the rafters and not come down, which I thought was a really funny idea, except that it wasn't working because I didn't have, at that point, Wally wasn't a sympathetic character. He wasn't someone who people were cheering for because he was hiding in the rafters or staying in the rafters. He was just a kid who was causing trouble at school. So I really needed a reason to get Wally up in the rafters. And, I went around in my head for a long time just trying to figure out what could motivate Wally to do that. And for some reason, I don't even know why, but I was in a hotel in Portland, Oregon, I think. And I just thought to myself, look up on the internet alphabetical list of the countries. And so I did. And lo and behold, way down at the bottom of the list, there's a country called Wallis and Futuna. It's a little island in the South Pacific, or islands. And I thought, well, look at that. Wally's name is Wally Fenstermacher. There's no reason why his name can't be Wallace Futuna Fenstermacher, and he can be named after this country. And then from there, I realized that in a lot of gymnasiums, there's, flags or some kind of banners all around the perimeter. And I thought if our school had the flags of the countries going around the perimeter of the gym, and there wasn't one for Wallace and Futuna, then Wally would have a reason to protest that he wants a flag for Wallace and Futuna in the gym, since he's named for the country. And so then I had a reason to put Wally up there. Now he had a protest. He had a reason to go up there to demand that Wallace and Futuna be better represented in our little rural elementary school. So a lot of what I do when I'm stuck is I look for other avenues into what I'm trying to do. Like very often I have an idea of what I'm trying to communicate, what I want to get done. But when that's not working, I really force myself to think of other things that could happen, other situations, other events that could spur whatever needs to happen. And so I've learned not to rely or not to necessarily even trust my initial idea. I think it's a good idea when I have it, or I wouldn't have started writing it. But I've I don't know, opened myself up to the idea that there might be better ideas than my initial idea. And so I asked myself a lot of, what ifs. What if this happened? What if this kind of character were introduced? What if instead of going this direction, I go this direction? And a lot of times that doesn't pan out. But I don't mean that in a negative way. Like the direction I'm going, the new direction I'm taking doesn't necessarily always work, but it almost always leads me to the direction that does eventually work.
What revision strategy or strategies do you find most useful when revising your own stories, and why? What problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
I never throw anything away. I've written a lot of stories that I've only written the first page, or sometimes, I start in the middle of a story, or sometimes I know the ending of a story and I just can't make it work any other way. But I don't get rid of them, because I've learned to trust that if I had the original idea, there's something about it that I like. So maybe it's going to work somewhere. And so when I'm writing another story and I'm in a jam, a lot of times I'll go back and look at things that I've written before, beginnings or middles or ends, and see if I can fit them together in some way. And a lot of times I can, and that helps me. So one of the stories I tell is called Vacation Bible School. And in that story, the attic of the church is filled with bats. And so I start with that. I set that up. And then, of course, in a lot of my stories, I want you to forget what I've initially told you. Many of my stories, I tell you everything you need to know in the first 3 lines of the story. And then my whole objective is to get you to forget that I told you that. And so then I go into this whole long thing about how we had Vacation Bible School at the Baptist church, and me and my buddy Skeeter wanted to get into the baptismal because we thought it would be fun. And we were Methodist, we were at the Baptist church, so a lot of these experiences were new to us. And then we're doing the offering. Somebody has built a big scale, and there's a pink can on one side and a blue can on the other, and the girls put their money in the pink can and the boys put their money in the blue can, and then whichever side of the scale goes down, that gender wins the offering. And of course, there's a lot wrong with that, not just theologically, but the weight of American money has very little to do with the value of American money. So, and then the preacher hates the way we're doing the offering, but he's not necessarily in charge. And he tells us finally that if we continue to do the offering in this way, the demons of hell will descend upon us and snatch our souls. And so Skeeter and I then engineer a way. We drop like 15 pounds of pennies into the blue can. And that causes the pink can to fly off the scale and smash it through a hole in the ceiling. And then I bring back the bats. The bats come down, and we think, of course, that they're the demons of hell that are coming to snatch our souls. So I establish that way at the beginning, and then I do everything I can to get you to forget that the bats are up there, so that when the bats come back out, it's funny to remember that I set that up in the beginning. And that's called, I learned from my good friend Daniel Morden, a Welsh storyteller. That's called reincorporation, and it sounds better when he says it with his Welsh accent. But that means bringing back the dead. So I put something in the beginning, and then I just kind of bury it, like a body, and then I go through the story and bring it back to life at the end. But with that story in particular, to tie this into your actual question, I didn't have enough distance between introducing the bats and then having them come back in the middle of the or at the end of the story. So I went back to some others. I looked back at stories that I'd written before that I hadn't finished, and I had this one where Skeeter and I don't even remember everything about it, but we go out to shovel snow to make a little bit of money. But we're like 7, so it's a debacle. And then in that story, there was a teeter totter where we made a catapult for shooting snow. In fact, I don't think I had the scale in the original story until I went back and read about that teeter totter. And I thought to myself, I can have this teeter totter. If I take the same teeter totter idea, I can have the scale. And so, that's where I got one idea from another story and put it in to the one that was working better. And then and so I guess that's where the scale came from. So I have a lot of ideas that are stuck in other stories, and those stories aren't going anywhere. And so I often find those little things to put into another story. So then in the Vacation Bible School story, I pause after I say the weight of American money has very little to do with the value of American money. And I go off on this whole snow shoveling thing to get you, further distance from the bats. And so, it's just a lot of plugging in things that are relevant to the story, but also distract you from the story at the same time.
What's your favorite part of the writing or the storytelling process, and why?
I think my favorite part is when I've worked on a story, sitting here at my computer or with a notepad and a pen. And it takes me varying amounts of time to write a story. And I mean, like, I've had a few that have just come to me in the moment, but others take 6 months to write. The Wally story took me a solid 6 months, if not longer, to write. And so when I finally feel like I've gotten the written version down, usually in the first people that used to hear my story would be my wife and children. She homeschooled the kids, and they have grown up going to storytelling festivals. My oldest daughter went to the National Storytelling Festival for the first time when she was 6 months old, and my youngest daughter has been going to storytelling festivals, all of her life. So they're very story savvy, and my wife is very story savvy, and they're all very funny and smart. And so I would sit down and read them the very first version of the story. And when I got them to laugh at any of my jokes, I felt like I'd really accomplished something, because they, even from a very young age, they know what funny is. They know what a well-crafted story sounds like. So that was always a real joy. Now they're grown and doing other things, so that doesn't happen as often. But then I have to tell the story on stage for the first time. And I don't stand around in my office or in front of a mirror and rehearse my stories formally. So usually the very first time I tell a story on stage is the first time that the general public has heard it. And it's always nerve-wracking. I mean, I trust what I do, but you never know how it's going to go. You don't know if you're going to connect with the audience. You don't know if there's going to be a lightning storm. I mean, 1,000 things can go wrong. And I know that I'm ready to tell a story when I'm sitting off stage and the MC is announcing me, and I'm thinking to myself, whatever you do, don't tell that new story. Like, when I'm trying to talk myself out of it, I know that it's ready. Because it's the hardest thing I do on stage, is tell a story for the first time. And so when I get up on stage and I tell a story for the first time and it gets the reaction that I'm hoping for, that is one of the most satisfying things that happens in my career. Just because when I'm telling a story that I've told 1,000 times and it works, I mean, great. I knew it was going to work. There's not much danger in that. But when I'm telling a brand new story for the first couple of times, it's just, and it's working. It's just this wonderful feeling of, wow, all that time you spent sitting at your desk, choosing all of those words, putting them in that order is really paying off.
What reading or listening suggestions do you have? What storytellers do you keep in your back pocket?
I think the authors that have influenced me the most are obviously Mark Twain, and then Faulkner and Charles Bukowski, Rudyard Kipling, Jack London, and then Farley Mowat. I don't know if you know who Farley Mowat is, but he's a Canadian writer. Wrote a lot of nonfiction, but he has this wonderful way of making tragic events funny. Like he's the kind of guy that really encapsulates the whole, this isn't funny now, but it's going to be funny later. He really finds a way to show you the humor in really crazy situations. So I've always I enjoy his stuff. And then Patrick McManus used to write the funny story in the back of Field and Stream or Outdoor Magazine. I had to quit reading him actually because I was afraid I'd start stealing his stuff. So I haven't read Patrick McManus in a long time. And then storytellers, there's just so many, and there's so many different kinds of storytellers. There are people telling stories from every tradition throughout the world. And some storytellers are very serious, and some use a lot of music, and some are funny and meaningful all at the same time. So there's a woman out of Georgia named Carmen Didi who emigrated to America when she was, I think, 5 years old out of Cuba. They had to leave Cuba. And so she tells a lot of stories from a Cuban immigrant perspective that are, again, hilarious, but also very poignant in places. And then a guy named Kevin Kling out of Minnesota just is a fascinating storyteller because he's had several tragedies in his life. He was born with a couple of disabilities and spent a lot of his young life in hospitals getting operations, like in the 50s and 60s. So, it wasn't great. And then he was in a motorcycle accident and tore up his other arm. And so, he says that we all have disabilities. Some we were born with, some are self-inflicted. And so he has a wonderful way of communicating life with disabilities. And then there's a storyteller also out of Philadelphia named Charlotte Blake Alston. She's an African-American storyteller. So she tells a lot of traditional African stories, but also a lot of stories about growing up as a Black kid in the 50s and 60s and 70s and that experience. And she incorporates a lot of music in. Ed Stuyvesant, again, from Philadelphia, tells traditional tales and also original tales. But the thing about Ed is, I always say, if you want to learn how to mess up on stage, watch Ed. Because when Ed makes a mistake, this is one of the earliest and best lessons I learned in storytelling. When Ed makes a mistake on stage, he doesn't get flustered or panicked. He would just start to ad lib and explore that mistake in a hilarious way until you've forgotten the original story that he was telling. And then he'll come back in and finish the story. And then there's another teller out of San Francisco named Charlie Chin. And he tells a lot of traditional Chinese stories. And I learned from him a lot of the start one story, go into another story, go from that into another story, and then come back out to the second story, and then come back out to the third story. That's, I do a lot of that, and I learned a lot of that from Charlie. So, I mean, I could go on with this list forever, but there's fantastic storytellers all around the country. And if you just type storytellers into the internet, a lot of them are going to come up. And I apologize to all the ones I didn't name. Bill, Don, Andy, Kimmy.
Thank you so much for that reading and listening list. I can't wait to check out those storytellers. Thank you for making time to have this conversation with me. I learned so much and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I meant when I earlier, your very first question, I meant to hold up a copy of my new book. That ain't the whole plan. Available through my website and nowhere else.